Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the EarlyBirds Explorer Weekly webinar. My name is Chris Poria. As we mentioned every time that this webinar series is run by EarlyBirds team to promote disruptive leaders, especially in innovators, mostly focused on startups or scale-ups who have at least a minimum viable product. So today we have an Australian startup called Avertro. Avertro is the strategic cybersecurity headquarters that helps leaders run the business of cyber. They focus on the business representation of cybersecurity, building a permanent bridge to translate cyber in a normalized way. Their SaaS platform helps leaders elevate their game by explaining cybersecurity to executives, forecasting outcomes, right sizing spend, and validating their strategy so that they can optimize the use of external assistance and prove that they are doing cyber right. Today, Ian Yip, the CEO of Avertro, going to share their story with us. We are going to hear from Ian for approximately 30 to 40 minutes, and then we open floor for questions. Just to introduce Ian, Ian has held a variety of cybersecurity leadership, advisory, strategy, sales marketing, product management, and technical roles across Asia Pacific and Europe in some of the world's leading companies, including McAfee, Ernst & Young, and IBM. Please share your questions through the chat box in the meantime, or request to speak once we open for questions. Ian, welcome to this webinar, and over to you, mate.
Thank you, Chris. Morning, everybody. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so as Chris is saying, we are a startup based in Australia. I'm personally based out of Sydney. We've got a distributed team. Some of us are based in New South Wales, some based in Victoria, and then we actually have one person overseas. We are the strategic cybersecurity headquarters that help leaders manage the business of cyber. What that effectively means is there's a lot of, and we'll get to that, but there's a lot of things that people do where they need some help, where they use a bunch of spreadsheets and they use some existing tools in a not very fit for purpose manner to basically help with reporting, help with the ongoing hygiene of how they do cyber, and help do strategic cyber better. And we streamline, automate, and help them make that process much less painful. Bit of history, we are an Antler portfolio company. So I don't know how well the audience knows the Antler program or the startup network in Australia, but Antler is a global venture capitalist and also incubator accelerator. We were in the first Sydney cohort back in June last year. Antler is based overseas. They have programs running in New York, in London, in Singapore, in parts of Europe, in Africa, and they're about to start their fourth cohort in Sydney, January, I believe, and I think they're taking applications, so that's my little plug for Antler. But they're also VC, so they're investors in Avertro, they're investors in a whole bunch of Antler portfolio companies, and we've got a lot of value out of them. We did Antler Demo Day back in November 2019. The video actually is online. Obviously, the world was very different back then, and some of those projections we were talking about back then have been revised for the new normal. We did release the first version of the product back in January, and we closed our first commercial deal 2 weeks after that. Now, we are also a Cyrise company. So Cyrise is a cybersecurity focused accelerator here in Australia, and we're part of cohort 3, which finished in June. Cyrise is actually currently just started cohort 4, and they also are a VC of sorts, which means we've got also some funding from Cyrise for those unfamiliar with Cyberise is backed by NTT and Deakin University, so in an indirect way. Deakin and NTT are also investors in us through the Cyberise program. And then we actually also just closed a round of investment in July. You can read a little bit about that online. I think one of the Outler communications people just wrote a bit of a piece about it. So there's some details there, but I won't talk about it in too much detail. What that has allowed us to do is to accelerate our engineering capabilities. So we've doubled in size over the last couple of months to be able to go faster and get to what our customers are asking us to do. And the problem we solve is effectively this disconnect between cyber team and everybody else, particularly at executive layer. Now, this pressure from executives and board members not understanding cyber risk and what they should do about it has probably only emerged as a actual problem security teams have been forced to solve over the last 5 years. So prior to that, it was very much a technical discipline, and nobody outside of IT really cared about it. It was very operational. It was very tactical. It was very reactive. There are obviously still parts of the industry that remain like that and were very audit driven. We can argue whether that's fine or not. I think a lot of it depends on the industry they're in, the size of the company, the types of businesses they do, and really the maturity of the board and the executives in that organization to really care. But the more educated amongst that community understands cyber risk is a business challenge. And as those parts of the community that are putting pressure on heads of security to tell the cyber story, to prove they're doing it right, and to actually say, this is how we are positioned as far as cyber risk is concerned, and this is how we're dealing with it, and this is what we're doing about it. We did a study back last year to really understand and size this issue. And what it amounted to was it costs about $1.5 million on average in terms of the average business that tries to do this. Now, bear in mind, they tend to be mid to large size organizations. So a small to medium business probably doesn't need to deal with this just yet. A startup, depending on the industry, may or may not have to do it. Financial services tends to have to really care. We obviously care because we are a cybersecurity startup, and we actually use our own platform to manage our own cyber risk and manage our own capabilities. But definitely mid to large size companies care a lot. Some spend more on humans to try and solve the problem than others. And some are looking for ways to streamline and right-size the way they use help and the right-size the way they manage cyber. As I was alluding to, for the most part, people are using spreadsheets to do this, very subjective spreadsheets, and many, many spreadsheets. Most they create from scratch. Some they get given to them. Some are handed to them by the consultants they use. The challenge of using consultants to do this is, while the consulting teams are there, they can help to a certain extent. Once the teams have left, they're left holding all this stuff that they don't necessarily know what to do with, which means for the most part, they're just reporting on project management progress, but they're not actually being able to manage and report on their cyber posture, their cyber risk, how things are changing, and so on, unless they get their house in order. And even with spreadsheets, it gets very expensive. As you can see, consultants typically make up about 300K of this amount. Internal staff effort is about 5 FTE. And then they can use tools, like I said. For the most part, people will use parts of a governance, risk, and compliance tool to do aspects of this. Let me be clear, we are not a GRC tool. However, there's a lot of concepts that we help solve and address that use the language of governance, risk, and compliance. And there are, in some cases, use cases where we help our customers solve GRC type things in the security realm, which interestingly enough negates the need for them to actually buy a GRC tool. So as Chris was saying, our goal is to help leaders manage and elevate their cyber game, ultimately to be able to explain cyber, forecast how things are really going to be, justify right size spend, and validate everything so they're doing it right, and optimize how they use the help that otherwise would be costing them, as we said, about 300K on average, in a lot of cases, even more. We focus on the business representation of cyber, right? So what that means is we take a lot of data. Some of it is manually driven in, some of it can be automated from the sources that people typically have, from the spreadsheets, and help them translate, normalize. Normalize is effectively give them a way to measure and report on the metrics they should be reporting on by taking in relevant data points, figuring out how they tie together and what they really mean, and then giving them a permanent way to operationally do all the things they otherwise would need to do on an ad hoc basis and could take weeks to months if and when they're asked to do it. In terms of how we do that, effectively, we're focusing on giving people a decent and ongoing view of their cyber risk, of their strategy, of the capabilities that they hold, which could be based on some proprietary method that they may be holding inside, or based on the standard. If you've heard things like the NIST CSF or the ISO 27001, or even the Australian government's ASD8 or the ISM for the government, those are just different representations of how companies try and articulate their way of doing cybersecurity capability maturity. That, in the most cases, is not enough. They need to be able to understand strategy on top of that and how risks sit on top of that. And they need to be able to do things with that data. They need to be able to actually report on how things are going to look like next month, how things look like a year ago, how they compare, talk about business cases, do modeling to understand if I'm going to spend $20 million, what does that get me? What if I needed to spend double that amount? Or what if I got the budget cut to half that amount? What can I do with $10 million? And then ultimately report on it to the people that are actually giving them the money and the stakeholders that care. As I was saying, we do take governance, risk, and compliance type metrics, and we help them report on those things. We help manage supply chain and third-party risk. We take some of the technical aspects of that and translate and normalize it. Most companies don't actually report on the technical, or rather, let me correct that. They shouldn't be reporting on most of the technical data that they hold to the executives and board members. Unfortunately, in the absence of better metrics, that's what they end up reporting on, which, by the way, means the stakeholders and the boards don't care about cyber because they don't understand those things. And then we also take other automated data feeds, depending on what our customers ask us for, to be able to give them all these metrics. So ultimately, we help board members and executive align with the cyber mission of the cybersecurity team to ensure success. Now, in terms of traction, we currently have 8 pilot customers and 5 design partners. What that amounts to is some of the people we work with, and we speak with other organizations fairly regularly as well. We just don't count them as pilot customers or design partners, because to count as a design partner or a pilot customer of ours, you have to speak with us at least fortnightly. So we have 13 organizations that we speak with fortnightly to make sure that they're successfully using our platform and that we are successfully getting feedback on our roadmap from them, and that we are also iterating properly to solve any challenges they currently have and any challenges on their radar in the focused manner that we need to for how they want to strategically manage cybersecurity and how they want to deal with cyber risk and how they want to manage their ongoing security posture and strategy. We do have about 40 other companies that we speak with semi-regularly, mainly just to get periodic feedback and ensure that we're not overcorrecting for these 13 companies. Some of these companies are actually paid customers. Some of them we're just working on in a pilot environment to make sure we get to the point where we're fit for purpose and they will become commercial customers. And then design partners, the reason we call them something different is design partners do not use production level data on a system. So they're basically using a test environment that we provide them with semi-real data, and then they try and adapt that thinking to how they would use it and then give us feedback that way. So it's a very design thinking way of doing a product build. And in fact, when we were doing the Antler program, we started to do aspects of this anyway. Obviously, at that time, they weren't pilot customers. They were much more like design partners. Before we wrote a single line of code, we spoke with a bunch of organizations to make sure that, again, in the design thinking way of doing things, we were doing mock-ups, we were doing fact-finding, we were doing analysis and design based on the focused way they were trying to deal with this issue in the spreadsheets, in the GRC tools with consultants, so that by the time we built a single line of code, we were actually making sure we were doing the right thing. And interesting enough, we started as of September, August this year. We have a lot more conversations with organizations we've never spoken before that validate that the way we've done this is the right way of doing it, because we've managed to find companies that look at what we currently have, and assuming they're actually struggling with this problem, what we have resonates a lot with them, and we definitely get to pilot much more quickly than we used to. And in most cases, we get to at least the point where they're thinking about how they budget their security program to bring us on board in the short to medium term, so they can start using what we have to solve their problem. In terms of early adopters we're looking for, ultimately we're looking for companies who have this challenge. So you're probably a mid-sized company, but you don't have the budget to throw at people. Let me give you an example. When we speak to a big organization, we're talking tier one, possibly one of the banks, they can use tech to solve this problem, but what they've been doing is spending more than those figures I was talking about to hire teams of people to literally do this manually. Now, when we speak to a slightly smaller company, but still big enough to care, they don't have the funds to throw and hire teams and teams and teams of people to do what we're talking about, but they still have the challenge. So what we have really resonates with them to actually solve the problem, because they can't spend the consulting dollars, they can't spend the headcount dollars. So that's the ideal adopter for us. Ideally, that our early adopters already have a head of security. It's probably a couple of hundred employees. For the most part, they'll also have at least 2 other security team members helping the head of security trying to deal with this. And they will typically also have an exco and a board that cares about cyber risk. So financial services is one that comes up all the time. We do have quite a lot of financial services organizations. Government definitely resonates as well, because governments tend to also have this issue. Probably we've spoken to utilities, we've spoken to education, so it applies to pretty much any organization in any industry. It's just literally down to whether you care enough about this challenge. The offer is actually on the EarlyBirds marketplace, so you can actually look at the specifics there. But ultimately, we have 2 key modules that we are offering to early adopters. So we expect early adopters to pick one or the other for that offer we have on the EarlyBirds marketplace, not both. It's so that we can get you up to speed very quickly, and we will onboard you as part of that offer with that early adopter pricing. So we either have the Cyber HQ solution, which focuses on that bridging of the and normalizing of the technical cyber bits to report on cyber and prove you're doing it right to your exco and your board members. Or if you specifically have a supply chain third-party risk challenge, we also have a module to address that primarily, and then deal with that first, as opposed to the Cyber HQ aspect. Most of our pilots and design partners do both. So they're obviously our paid customers pay us more than the offer on the EarlyBirds marketplace. But what we did do is just price that accordingly to make sure that we can focus and reward you as an early adopter. So here are our contact details. I guess what I can talk a little bit about is, let me just skip back to these use cases to give you a couple of examples about how our design partners and pilot customers use the platform. So for the most part, they use both the third-party module and also the Cyber HQ module. So for the third-party module, it's effectively managing their third-party process. So those of you who actually have to do this, and that's pretty much any organization, unless you spend a 6-figure licensing fee on some of the cybersecurity third-party modules out there, it's either consulting or it is spreadsheets. So if you're using spreadsheets, and I've personally had to fill in these spreadsheets for a couple of the customers that we are bringing on board, because we are a third party for them. So the process goes like this, and you'll not be unfamiliar with it once I describe it. Most companies who don't deal with this in a very nice manner will have some sort of spreadsheet as a questionnaire. This questionnaire is typically between 50 and 200 questions, asking a third party that they're thinking of bringing on board about their cybersecurity capabilities. So there'll be things like, do you have a BYOD policy? Do you have a data center? Do you use the cloud? How much of your environment is in the cloud? Do you have a ISMS? Which ISMS do you use? Do you have a report? Do you do pen testing? And so on. So this is a really painful spreadsheet that, as a solution provider, we have to fill in. So I'll get the spreadsheet and I will sit there for hours and hours and hours filling it in, which is painful for me, and I've got to do it every single time we go through procurement for somebody. And then the third-party procurement team on the other side will have to get my spreadsheet and sit there and manually read every single one of my responses and figure out if what I've given them is good enough. If it's not good enough, they've got to call or email me back with the spreadsheet and tell me which bits of the spreadsheet they need a better answer on and they need evidence for. And then it goes back and forth through emails, and the spreadsheet goes back and forth, and we spend time reading this. Makes procurement go for months. And the better way to do this is to streamline and optimize it inside a platform like ours, which we do. So effectively, we help our customers remove the spreadsheet from that painful process. We become a system of record for the way they do that. And we have out-of-the-box third-party questionnaires so that they have to reinvent the wheel and come up with their own. And we give them ways to report on and compare the third parties and score them and manage this on an ongoing basis. So it's a much more streamlined way of doing it that removes that pain. So that's the third-party use case we solve for some of our customers. And we're iterating on that to make the reporting more sophisticated and put in automated feeds. So the interesting use case that's come out of this is we've had requests from some of our existing customers and potential customers to ask if we can integrate with some of these very expensive third-party platforms that are already out there. Because interestingly enough, they don't all actually solve the core issue. They just solve some of the external bits. So I won't mention any by name, but if you go explore them, a lot of times they're scanning websites, they're scanning the dark web for mentions or potential exposures, and they'll give a specific score for an organization as to how quote unquote secure they are, but it doesn't always necessarily give them the in-depth view that a spreadsheet would give them. Now, sometimes they will use a thing like SurveyMonkey to do surveys to collect that information in something other than the spreadsheet. But even if you use a survey tool, what ultimately comes back is a web version of a spreadsheet, which our customer then has to go and do the same things with. So we take care of the core part of that, and then potentially can integrate with other fancy third-party modules that do scanning to give them a big picture view of third-party risk. Now, if I go to the Cyber HQ module, like I said, for some of our customers who don't want to spend big dollars on GRC tools, we do actually solve that for them just for the cybersecurity use case, not for the enterprise risk use case. We're not trying to be an enterprise GRC tool. We're literally trying to solve the Cyber HQ problem, which by virtue of doing it, helps them do better governance, helps them manage cyber risk better, and helps them actually comply to some of the standards out there. Because we do support some of these out of the box, the ones I mentioned, NIST, ISO 27001, ASD8. We've had requests for some other privacy type compliance standards as well. Those are on the roadmap, but they're not very hard to do. It's just going to come down to our customers demanding, more customers demanding that versus the core cybersecurity platforms. Now, one of our key customers actually used this for an audit use case, which honestly we didn't build it for, but like I said, because of what we do, we help with. So typically when you get an audit, so they had an ISO 27001 audit, and this speaks to the value of working with a startup. They actually called us, the head of security called me, and they said, we have an auditor coming in next week to audit us for ISO 27001. So any of you who've ever had an audit done, it's painful, right? If you're the head of security, you're the one being hassled by the auditor while the audit is happening, and you kind of have no peace because you have to provide evidence, you've got to give them the info. So as it turns out, the use case they used us for specifically was to become their system of record for how they manage capabilities, which meant we could provide that kind of view of the world, and we also store the evidence for that customer, which meant all they needed to do was give the auditor access to our platform, but just read-only. Now, at the time, we didn't support the read-only auditor access. We needed the auditor to be an admin, but our customer didn't want to give the auditor admin access, so they called me and said, look, they're coming back in next week. Can you give them read-only access, and can you tell us how quickly you can do this? So I called, I sat down with our team, and we decided we could do this for them within the next 3 days. So this is the value of having a startup, being able to work with you very quickly to solve a specific use case that is quite urgent for you as a customer. So we actually got this done for them. By the time the auditor came along, they were very thankful. We're all about customer success and customer satisfaction, so we were happy that we were able to do this for them very, very quickly. And I called this customer back in about 2 weeks, and I said, how did your audit go? And the answer to me was, not really sure. And I said, why? I said, because for the first time ever, they weren't bothered about the audit, because the auditor just happily went along their way and used our system to conduct the audit. And in the end, they passed the audit just by using a read-only version of getting to our system to be able to do this work and leave the head of security alone, which freed them up to actually do their day job, which they were very happy about. So that was a use case we didn't plan for, but was very, very valuable for our customer. Beyond that, we've had other customers ask us to help them figure out what the right things to do are. So they'll use the cyber strategy module inside our platform to figure out what the most optimal way to spend their money is, and also articulate this to their execs, to the CFO, to the CRO, to the board members. So we have ability inside the platform to help people say, if you're going to spend X amount, these are the things you should probably spend on, whether it's something they suggest themselves or it's something that we provide. We do have a library of strategic items they could do. But for the most part, people already are doing something, so they'll load what they have inside our system and then manage the strategy that way and use what we have to right-size and justify their strategy and do a bit of business modeling, so that as they're doing things, they can prove and report on the project status and ultimately do the bang for buck calculation that proves that they're right-sizing their strategy. And then beyond that, the most common one is obviously reporting. I don't want to downplay the reporting. The reporting is important, but reporting on its own isn't all we do. If all people wanted was reporting, they could use a reporting tool, right? Like any of the ones people use out there, which the big companies do use. But we help them maintain and manage the logic underneath the covers to give them that kind of reporting to be able to talk about cybersecurity in language that they understand. Possibly the best way to do this is, I won't do a full demo for the for time purposes, but what I will do is show you 1 or 2 reporting screens inside our platform. Let me get to a system. So I'm just going to show our executive reporting just to give you a view of what we can help people report on, and then we hold a lot of information underneath and do a bit of automation under the covers. So this is actually still a beta version, just actually due in this current version of the solution. So you can ignore some of these numbers because they don't make a lot of sense right now, but just showing you visually, this is actually our balance scorecard. So for our customers who really don't have time, every time they're asked to do executive and board reporting, this is the one page they take. And we're talking about how resilient they are. We're talking about the outcome they think they're going to get to. And we're talking about the targets they're trying to get to and compare that. And we're talking about how they're managing cyber risk. We're talking about how they are managing their maturity. And we're talking about how they're getting better over time. And that's all the screen does. But an informed, very, very smart CISO can talk about this specific report for an hour if they wanted to, because it has all the key metrics that they need to be able to speak the language of the board and the language of the exco and talk about resilience, talk about risk, and talk about maturity. And the power of our platform is, like I said, forecasting. So we can actually go forward in time to project what the resilience is going to look like in December. And we can also look at what the resilience is going to look like back in the past. So it's a really good way to hop on our time machine and go back and forth and say, look at how far we've come and look at how far we're going to go because of the money that we're spending, which in this case seems to be about $20 million. Now, the way to think about this is effectively the executive summary. And then we have other bits of info, which I'm not going to get too much into, where this is what we're calling our executive report, which digs into the other bits of info that you saw on there. So we'll give a bit more context around the resilience score, get a bit more context around the trending of capabilities over time, and we'll give a bit more context around key things like what are the key concerns we have in terms of risk, what are we doing well in. So in this environment, we're bringing down data breach risk pretty well. Our program is tracking on budget, but we're going to be a little bit late. Probably want to dig into why our budget program and budget is going to be late. These are our key risks that are outside tolerance. These are the risks we're reducing by the largest margin, so data breach, fraud, and extortion. And then there's a slightly different kind of visualization for some context behind that project. And similarly, we have a time machine here to take time slices of the world. So we can go back in time and say, back in March, we weren't doing as well as we're currently doing. And then if we go into the future, we will be doing maybe not as well, because in this environment, we are not doing the right things to do something about our cyber program. So this raises questions and generates conversation, right? So what the main value besides the visualizations that we can show is that we allow our customers to generate the right kinds of conversations with their exco and their board members, which they never have been able to before. One of the, we were speaking to a government organization probably a month ago, 2 months ago, and asked what they wanted out of the meeting with us. And they said to me, we just want to know what good looks like. Because you know what? All those things I just showed you, most people don't even know they're supposed to be showing those things to board members and executive committees. And they don't know how to visualize those things. And even the ones who do know, don't know what they should be taking in to be able to translate, normalize, and visualize those things and be able to report and manage those things on an ongoing basis. And beyond that, we've arrived at what we've got there, not just because we made it up. We have a set of advisors. We have my experience, which I'm not going to get too into much detail, but just go to LinkedIn and I've had a lot of experience doing this for people and talking to executives and board members about it. But we have a very, very good set of advisors, which includes consulting firms, which includes very experienced CISOs. One of our board of advisor members, which we've yet to announce because we're just, it's not the right time yet, but they're officially on board as well, happens to be the CISO of a very, very large government organization. So it's people like that with real expertise and real backgrounds in trying to do this that have helped to advise our product team, our engineering team, to make sure that we have the brains trust to get to the point where we can actually do the right things by our customers and show them what good looks like. And when they implement us, help them solve the problem and do the right thing, and prove they're doing the right thing, and prove they're doing it right, and actually show what good looks like to their exco and their board members. So yeah, I think I've taken up my my half hour to 40 minutes ish. So with that, I think I can open up to questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. A very good presentation. I think we already have 2 questions. The first one is, are you competing? It's coming from Suren, who is our SME or subject matter expert consultant in energy space. Yep. And he's asking, are you competing with data privacy compliance software?
Only if they're using us for a compliance use case. But if you think big picture, no. So we have customers of ours using us side by side with compliance software, like the GRC tools and also the data privacy compliance software. I have a feeling I know the one you mean. it's a very, very big one with billions of dollars that has the word trust in it. So if they're going to use us literally for that, then yeah, you could probably use some of the other platforms. But for the most part, people are not looking at us to solve that use case.
Okay, great. Guys, if you have any questions, please either put that into the chat box or you can raise a hand to speak, and we will allow you to talk through the webinar. We have a next question. What area of a business do you approach to secure a pilot?
So predominantly we speak to the head of security because while it might seem like because we're solving a Xcode board use case in terms of the pain, they end up being the audience. Because if you think about it, they're not the ones lumped with the pain of solving the problem. They're the ones giving the pain of solving the problem. They care a lot, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they normally just go to head of security. You need to tell me every month or every quarter how you're doing and prove you're doing it right to me. They don't care how they're given the information. So most of the time we're speaking to the CISO or the equivalent.
Okay, great. And our next question coming from Jeff. What do you need to run a pilot?
We need at least the buy-in from the head of security to care enough to want to do a pilot. Mm-hmm. Generally, you also speak with whoever's in charge of cyber risk for the CISO, and sometimes they will also have someone who's in charge of the business operational aspect of running a cybersecurity program. And I use the word operations very carefully. We don't deal with the SecOps team because they don't necessarily have to produce information. They are a source of information. But mid to large size companies will have someone like a COO kind of person who has to produce the reports, who has to understand what budgets are being used for what. So these are the three key people that are usually involved. In terms of ongoing commitment from our pilot customers, generally we need a commitment for them to speak with us for half an hour every 2 weeks for the duration of about 2 to 3 months.
Great. So we got another question coming from Samantha. How does your product work in conjunction with cyber insurance?
That's an interesting use case. We don't solve that for our customer just at the moment, mainly because I think customers don't understand the intersect between cyber insurance and cybersecurity. They still do cyber insurance as a way to reduce the exposure just by using the way insurance does it for you. But in speaking to cyber insurance folks and people in the cyber insurance industry interested in what we're doing, what we do is help give our customers and insurance providers extra visibility to be able to, I think, size premiums a lot better. If you think about it, if a customer of ours is using our platform properly, they should be able to have a conversation with a cyber insurance provider to say, our cyber posture is actually pretty good. So here is full visibility into what we're doing. Our insurance premiums should be sized accordingly instead of, in most cases, they don't know what their posture looks like, which means they end up getting charged premiums that are not necessarily correct and tend to be a little higher than it should be.
No, I think that's a very interesting question and a very interesting use case. Yeah. Because there might be some great opportunity actually to explore that further with some of these, especially the cyber insurance companies, and how they could potentially use your platform as part of sizing that insurance, policy, as well as the payment for those insurance.
Absolutely. So that there is you're right. There is an opportunity for a cyber insurance provider that want to partner with us. We're actually partnering with like I said, we have advisors or consulting type people. So we have a bit of a pilot with a consulting firm actually to figure out how they can actually use what we have to provide better value and a technology enabled way of doing what they do, because they see this as a way for them to be able to evolve their offerings for their customers and give better value than they've been able to do in the past just with documents and spreadsheets.
Oh, that's great. And I just saw that comment coming from Suren, who asked that question about data privacy compliance software. He mentioned that he has recently globally rolled out OneTrust in a previous role. And what was missing was the reporting and status reporting to C-suite. So he's saying, well, then for bringing the compliance and the reporting together.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, that was exactly the gap, right? Which is why I'm saying we don't compete with them, because that handles a very specific use case for compliance, and it's fine. You want a GDPR compliance, use that kind of platform.
Yeah.
But it's not a cybersecurity focused strategic way of doing security, which is what we focus on.
Yeah. And Samantha, please reach out. We can introduce you to Ian. She's saying that she got some good contact in this space. So she might want to explore some opportunity together with you,
Great.
which is great. Guys, if you have any questions, please put that through the comment box, or you can raise a hand. You should be able to see a hand kind of sign with speak. And if you press that, we should be able to open that up for you. We got a next question. Do you have any pilots or use cases in government?
We have plenty of use cases for government. In fact, we solved the government use case perfectly. The interesting thing about getting pilots government is obviously being a startup. There's a couple of hoops to jump through when it comes to government. So federal government, very openly. We also, I know for a fact, we solve a lot of federal government use cases, but it's sort of the hoops. I think some of those hoops are economically too high for us to want to go after right now. As I was saying, one of our key executive board advisory board members happens to be a very senior cyber person in the government. So we've validated the fact we can solve a lot of the federal government and state government's use cases. It's literally just getting through the hoops that is the hard part.
Okay. We got another question coming from Janet. Do you have any pilots in higher education?
We have a pilot customer who is an education provider that provides services to all sorts of education providers. Mm-hmm. We have conversations with some of the higher education providers because I also know for a fact this is how the more advanced thinking ones try and do cybersecurity. But for the most part, they also do it in spreadsheets.
Okay, great. And then normally, because we were talking about government, and there is a lot of focus now from Australian government to build sovereign capabilities for Australia. So in terms of your own company, if government wanted to have, because nowadays what they look for is in terms of sovereign capability, they wanted to have a kind of a local entity which is 100% focused on Australian capabilities, especially in defense area.
Yeah.
Would you have those kind of capabilities if required?
I mean, at the moment, we are purely focused on Australia,
yeah,
which means our partnerships tend to be with Australian companies as well. So the consulting firm I mentioned is an Australian company.
Okay.
So we're at the moment very, very sovereign focused on Australia. We do have conversations with overseas entities, but they also tend to be friends of Australia as well. So I think right now, because we're so focused on Australia, we're an Australian company, that's favorable for us.
Okay, great. In the meantime, we have another question from Samantha. Do the visualization come with recommendations? For example, if your score is predicted to decrease, consider doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah, so we have those data points and we have a library of things to be able to do that. So we do that in conjunction with things that our customers are already doing. So the interesting use case there is if they don't have a consultant or they don't want to use a consulting firm, then they potentially could use us. Mm-hmm. But because of our target market and our pilot customers, pretty much all of them have had consulting firms come in and do something. So the common use case we see right now is them wanting to use our platform to, I guess, validate what they've been given is right and then use what they've been given. But to answer Samantha's question, yes, we can also do that.
Okay, great. Guys, again, if you have any questions, please type in the chat box or you can press the speak button. We should be able to open you for comments or questions. In the meantime, Ian, how do you see that with the pandemic? What do you see? Is there a lot more demand for your services, or do you see there's a decreasing demand due to COVID-19?
The interesting thing is, over the last 2 months, we're seeing a lot more demand for what we do, because I think organizations are starting to get over the shock of what COVID has done to their organizations. So from a business standpoint, what we did do during when COVID hit was just double down on learning. So we still had plenty of conversations, and we were using those conversations to learn, and we focus on product build and capability build more so than commercial aspects. But over the last 2 months, we've seen a lot more commercial interest and conversations with organizations come up to want to actually explore how they can roll us into production. In fact, for the whole of September, we're closing a deal every week.
Wow, great. Okay, guys, we are getting close to our time. If you have any questions, again, use the chat box or use speak button. We will take most probably 1 or 2 more questions. Otherwise, we have to close this pretty quickly. I just got a message from Suren. Great presentation, and good luck with the rollout. Thank you, Suren. So do you see any other areas, Ian, that we can help, especially, looking at early adopters in the next, I would say in the next 3 months? What kind of early adopters are you focusing? Are you focusing on a specific industry sector, or you're looking across the industry sectors?
We're looking across industry sectors, but the ones where I think we resonate most tend to be financial services and utilities and critical infrastructure, because they're the ones with the most pressure to do this. Yeah. So if you ask me to focus, it'd be those 3. I'm not saying the others don't care. Like I said, we have pilot customers in the education sector and in building and construction and in wholesale and manufacturing. But I think the pressure in those areas isn't as great. Yeah. As I was saying, I mean, government definitely has a use case to solve. So there may be a very smart way for us to do something for a government organization that doesn't involve jumping through so many hoops. I would imagine doing something for a state government organization is probably a little easier in terms of the hoops than federal government. But so I suppose in terms of help, anyone who knows a way to do something with the government a little bit more easily than having to jump through 50 hoops for IRAP and all those kinds of things. I think if we're going to find a better way to do that, to at least explore use cases with government, I think that's something we're open to listening to and trying to figure out.
Great. Given that we got a couple of good, part of our team based out of Canberra, I'm sure that we would be able to help you out on that part. So thank you very much, Ian, for your time. And I think we have not got any further questions. So really appreciate for the presentation, and we are looking forward to be working with you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, Chris.
No problem. You have a good day.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye.